Why the 1176? So in order to really appreciate what 1176 truly does, you kind of have to talk a little bit about the dinosaurs and the chickens and where we were and how we got to where we are. The original design of a compressor involved what they called a variable mu tube, which was a tube that had a variable gain ability. So if you wanted to turn the volume down on something, this tube had the ability to kind of dial it back. Now, what determines what's going to dial that back? There's two designs, feed forward and feed back. The original designs used feed back, which meant it checked the output of that variable mu circuit and it turned the volume down when it got to be too loud, right? We moved past tubes into solid state or field effect transistors or FETs. The 1176 was born. A guy named Bill Putnam made the 176, which was a tube version. He adapted into the 1176, the 1178, 1174. There was a bunch in that neighborhood, but they replaced the tube, the vari-mu tube, with a FET circuit, which is a solid state circuit. If you want to know the difference between tube and solid state, listen to the Beatles' Revolver versus the Beatles' Abbey Road. Abbey Road was done on solid state stuff. So the 1176 was born at the time of solid state equipment in FET, a FET transistor. So it kept the feedback design, but it used a FET instead of a tube to adjust the gain when the threshold was reached to adjust the compression. All of this means that you don't actually get 4-to-1 compression or 10-to-1 compression or 20-to-1 compression. It means the more the signal compresses, the more ratio, the deeper the compression goes. So it's almost like pushing it off a cliff. It's not just a little bit. It goes hard. The other thing that FETs allowed the circuit to do that a tube couldn't is work really, really fast. So the attack and release of the detector, how quickly the compressor starts responding to the signal, was crazy fast on a FET circuit because solid state is way fast. So it could start working very, very quickly, which gives you that crazy attack, that punch when you use it on something like drums or something like that. The ultimate reason I love the 1176 is what it does to drums, what it does to the high end, to the pillowiness of the low end. It literally works on everything. It'll work great on a bass. It'll make a bass sound rounder and fuller. It'll make a vocal sound more aggressive and in your face. If you don't believe me, check out Michael Jackson's Thriller. Every single vocal was recorded on an 1170 through an 1176, and it just puts it right there on the edge of your nose. Drums have a punch and a depth. Plus, if you use it wrong, it does something really magical. And there are different versions that have more magic when you use them wrong. But in essence, it's all these factors combined that make an 1176 kind of unique among all the compressors that you can have.
There's also something unique about the way the attack and release knobs work on an 1176 versus other compressors, right?
Yeah, they're a little bit opposite. I mean, to be clear, the attack and release settings on any compressor are really just making adjustments on how the detector is working, how sensitive they are. So the attack is how lazy is this thing being about how quickly it's going to react to something. It's like a cop who's pulling people over for speeding. He's letting everybody go by until he gets to the one who's going 90 miles an hour. He's like, oh, I got to get him. As compared to a fast attack, he's going to pull you over if you're doing 66 in a 65. Right? So it's how aggressive is this thing going to start working when the criteria is met for the threshold to start. The other portion of it is the release. So once everybody's slowed down in traffic, when does the cop go back to taking a nap? When do you start relaxing and letting the signal go back to what it used to be? And in an 1176, like I said, because of that FET transistor being in there, the detector can work way faster than a lot of other compressors. Nowadays with computers, you actually can read the signal before it happens. So there's nothing faster than that. But in the analog world, the 1176, the distressor, things in that flavor tend to work the fastest because of that reason. And that's, it makes the attack and release very unique on these compressors. So great starter settings. The 1176 can be daunting because it doesn't have some of the same settings that another compressor has. For example, it doesn't have a threshold knob. So how do you know where it's going to start compressing, right? The compression actually starts, the threshold is met based on a ratio of the input to the output knobs. So you have to kind of have this relationship of gain structure. It's a pretty old school device that determines how much compression is happening based on the input versus the output. If you think about it, though, it makes sense. A lower output with a bigger input is going to give you more compression. A lower input with a bigger output is going to give you less compression. There's less to maintain, right? You're letting more of the signal pass through the unit. As far as starting settings go, there's a couple of pieces of advice that I got from my mentor, Trina Shoemaker, shout out. She said there's a couple of things. When they design the meter on any piece of equipment, their thought was this thing works right in the middle of this range of the meter. So generally, the middle of the meter is going to be where the designer thought this thing was going to operate the best. So when you're setting your settings, you're kind of looking for what's the middle of the meter doing, especially on a piece of analog equipment. Digital stuff, it's kind of a different conversation. But on analog meter, the middle of the range tends to be where the designers thought this thing was going to be working its best. That doesn't mean you have to stick there. You can use the entire thing. In fact, some of these analog pieces of gear work better because you're pushing them to the extremes. You're using them outside of what the designers thought. So that said, where do I begin? Where do I start with my settings on an 1176? There's a couple of terms that people use. One of the ones I see thrown around on the internet is the Dr. Pepper settings. And this comes from the original marketing stuff for the Dr. Pepper stuff was 10, 2, and 4s, the times of day you need a Dr. Pepper to pick you up. Whatever. On an 1176, if you set the input knob to 10 o'clock, you set the output knob to 2 o'clock, and you set the ratio to 4 to 1, that's your basic settings. So if you start there, maybe run a vocal through it, listen to it, adjust your attack and release. Attack and release is going to be program dependent. It's going to depend on if you've got somebody moving really fast, like Eminem, you're going to want a fast attack and fast release. If you've got somebody moving slower, like Celine Dion, you're going to want a slower attack and a slower release. How lazy do you want the compressor to be, or how aggressive do you want it to be? That said, attack and release can also help something like a bass become more aggressive. You can add punch to a bass that isn't there by tweaking that attack and release. So that gives you your starting point, 10, 2, and 4 to 1, and then adjust your attack and release. The attack and release will start to let the music come to life when you've got it dialed in. Then from there, you can adjust the amount of compression by changing your ratio of input to output. You can change the compression ratio. And one of the cool things about the 1176 is the 4-button trick, which is sometimes called the British trick. Leave it to the Brits to use our stuff in a way we didn't imagine. There were some British engineers who figured out that you could push in all 4 buttons of the compression ratios and get what Distressor calls a nuke mode. It's kind of a unique compression ratio. It does something magical to the high end. It makes a silky, silky top end, but it also makes a very beefy and aggressive low end. It's kind of my preferred setting on the 1176, and it's one of the things you can't replicate anywhere else.
For vocals or for
anything?
For anything, really.
Yeah, if you use that 4-button trick on vocals, you're obviously going for something kind of aggressive. Mm-hmm. It's an aggressive sound, but it works great on drums. It works great on bass. It's just worth a try. And something to be said, especially if you're working with a vintage unit, because Bitcoin has made vintage 1176's prices go through the roof. You don't want to destroy the meter. So if you're going to use 4-button mode, take it off of gain reduction and put it onto like +8 or something. There's a way to adjust what the meter is reading, the buttons on the right. And if you adjust it to the +8, you won't be bashing the ballistics of the meter when it goes into 4-button mode. Just a tip so you don't destroy your equipment.
And there's something special about your 1176 that you have in your studio.
My 1176 is serial number 385, which makes it a revision B. I think they did A, B, B, and then they came out with what they call the low noise versions. And the low noise versions have a thing because they're not just low noise where it reduces the amount of hiss that's passing through the system. It reduces the amount of hiss and noise in the mid-range, which is that's the critical spot that you're using any piece of audio equipment for, is the mid-range. And so the low noise versions, also known as the blackface versions, those tend to be a little bit quieter in that critical mid-range zone. That said, everything sounds like something, but to your question, my particular 1176 came from Kingsway Studio. It was used by Mark Howard, Trina Shoemaker, Daniel Lanois. It was on, I mean, pick a record, REM, U2, and then I used it for all my years at my former studio, the Music Shed, where it worked on tons of cool stuff. It's been around the block.
All right. Thanks so much.